Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for watching the show tonight. This is Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. Tonight is August 10th, 2015, a Monday evening. As always, you can stay up to date with us at www.arh.noaa.gov, and that'll bring you to all three offices throughout Alaska. Our weather info line is available 24/7 at 1-800-472-0391. You can follow us weather.gov/Alaska to get, again, all three offices. All three offices, a regional perspective on Facebook at NWS Alaska. And you can use Twitter to find us using the call sign at NWS Alaska and the hashtag AKwx for a regional perspective. And then on YouTube, look for us at AKwx TV. That's Alaska Weather TV. And you can see this show and a few other segments. This show will be uploaded later on this evening. So we don't have any headlines or advisories to talk about tonight. No products issued for this afternoon, and thus we'll jump right into our satellite image. We can see here out over the Bering Sea, a fairly calm pattern starting to develop as high pressure begins to build in over the central portion of the Bering. We do still have a trough that is located here over the Alaska Peninsula and towards the eastern Aleutians. And as that trough slowly works its way to the east, it will pull the low pressure systems that are near Dutch Harbor off to the east. This moisture plume is keeping things quite warm and moist throughout much of the Gulf. Some of that moisture has made it up towards the state, but much of it has stayed in over the marine areas. And then as we watch the loop one more time, we can see here some activity down in the West Pacific, and this is just a remnant typhoon activity. This will eventually work its way into our storm track. But for now, just expecting some weak systems to clip the western Aleutians, and otherwise just fog and marine stratus to develop under high pressure over the central Aleutians. Do want to note this low pressure system up here over the northern portion of Russia. As this thing continues to develop and spin towards the east and northeast, it will continue to push warm, moist air towards the northwest portion of the state. This is kind of going to be the battleground that we'll watch over the next couple days, where cold air is trying to spill down the Bering Strait, but this system is keeping a warm push onshore. So we'll expect fog throughout much of western Alaska and warming temperatures throughout those areas as well as that system continues to spin out there. Taking a look a little bit closer to home now, we can see there that is that same area, the same plume of moisture working its way up from the southwest to the northeast, and as it does so, just clipping much of south central. Our area of low pressure that's dominated the weather for the last 24 to 36 hours, bringing rain to the Cook Inlet region, is finally starting to push off to the east. It has triggered some thunderstorms over the Copper River Basin and the Alcan border this afternoon. And we'll watch now as this moisture continues to push off towards the east. Eventually, it will make its way into the Panhandle with a developing area of low pressure just near Sand Point later tonight. And as it does so, that will bring our rain into the Panhandle as we go into the next several days. Up over the interior portion of the state, a system dropping in along the Alcan border again, trying to bring some colder air down to the Brooks Range, and that's actually introduced some snow mixing into the rain into the forecast. Otherwise, abundant cloud cover associated with that system and the afternoon convection that is fired over the Copper River Basin, keeping most places at least partly cloudy, if not mostly cloudy. So let's jump into today's surface map here. As you can see, our area of low pressure near the Cook Inlet region is just starting to move east of the region. When we see that axis that goes right through the L there of the low pressure system, that's generally when we see things switch over from more of a steady rain to more of a showery on and off type rain. So right here along the Cook Inlet region, we are just starting to see that switch around. We do still have some showers along the Chugach and the Kenai Mountains, as well as the Alaska Range. And here's where we see our thunderstorms starting to develop along the Alaska Range over near the Copper River Basin. As we look a little bit farther to the west, just a few weak systems moving in that onshore flow, keeping things a little bit of light rain out there for the Pribilof Islands and towards the west coast. And here's where we see that fog associated with the warm air being pushed on. Up here towards the Brooks Range, that's where that trough has moved through, bringing just some light rain. The biggest thing up here is going to be the fog that develops overnight tonight. We right now just have it in low stratus form at about 600 feet. There's a deck of stratus hanging out that will eventually drop to the surface tonight as high pressure starts to develop and pushes that layer of moisture down towards the surface. Here's our stationary boundary that we're going to focus on for the next couple images here. This is where we expect our new area of low pressure to develop and kind of overtake this one here in south central. And as that does so, we'll start to see a new area of rain spin up over the next 24 hours. Out towards the Bering Sea, there's our area of high pressure at 1,017 millibars, starting to exert its influence over the western Aleutians, and this will slowly work its way to the east and help to keep our pattern fairly progressive throughout much of the week. Out over southeast Alaska, here we can see a fairly weak system. It looks rather impressive on the map, but it's a fairly weak system, just bringing some light rain to portions of the coastal areas there, and then again our thunderstorms over the interior portions of Canada. So taking a look now into tonight, we start to see that new area of low pressure develop, and this is really where the focus will be. This will be the driver of the weather for much of the southern half of the state. This will be the driver of the weather for much of the northern half of the state. So talking about this one first, again, developing, stealing the energy from this system up here. So we'll see showers diminish over much of south central as we go into tonight. Just some showers for the Alaska Range and the Copper River Basin as those thunderstorms die off with daytime heating. And we'll start to see that area of low pressure develop and work its way through the Gulf. Just light rain making it into southeast Alaska, but as this system approaches, that's where we expect that heavier rain associated with that moisture plume to make its way in. Fog and relatively quiet conditions with light winds for the most part over the Bering Sea. And here's where we have that warm air battling against this colder air associated with high pressure. So in between there, we do have some areas of fog. Could be dense at times, so if you're traveling along the Arctic coast, be advised by airplane or whatnot, be advised of the potential for lower visibilities. And there we do see that rain mixing in with a little bit of snow, especially along the Brooks Range overnight tonight. So now taking a look at Tuesday's forecast, our area of low pressure is down to 1,003 millibars, has reached an occluded front now, and is starting to push that area of moisture closer towards southeast Alaska as we get into Tuesday. So expect some more steady rain to build in there. There's our previous area of low pressure, basically just fizzling out along the Alcan border, being shredded by the mountains there of the Alaska Range. Do expect another small area of thunderstorms to develop on Tuesday afternoon once we start to see the sun and the heating of the day. Expect that area of thunderstorms once again tomorrow. And then as we look towards the Arctic coast, there again we see those areas of fog in the morning. They should lift once again in the afternoon, but there could be places that stay down in visibility all day, and we do still have a chance for some snow to mix in with the rain up along the Brooks Range. As we look towards southwest Alaska, onshore flow will keep some fog in the forecast along the coastal areas, and just some light showers associated with its weaker area of low pressure here. Otherwise, high pressure at 1,023 millibars continues to build in, and that will be the case as we go into Wednesday as well. This area of high pressure will start to push into southwest Alaska, keeping fog in the forecast there, but it will start to bring a drying northwest flow to much of south central. So there you can see a fairly nice day setting up for the Cook Inlet region into the northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska. This is where we do expect that system to develop and tap into that moisture of the North Pacific, and we do expect some moderate, possibly heavy rain at times for southeast Alaska on Wednesday. Just keep an eye on the forecast, keep an eye on your rivers and streams throughout the area. There could be a potential for those to rise rather quickly if that rain turns heavy. And then up towards the Arctic coast, there's that area of low pressure that came off of Russia, and it continues to spin warm air into much of the northwest Alaska. So while there are signs that we could see some colder temperatures developing through much of the northern portion of the state, this warm front, at least for the time being, will help to keep things fairly moderate for the rest of the next couple days. And then again, just some weak areas of low pressure triggering some showers and keeping fog in the forecast for much of the Bering Sea. Let's take a look at temperatures from 4 o'clock this afternoon. We can see much of southeast Alaska hanging out right in the low 60s, 63 degrees at Ketchikan, 60 degrees at Yakutat, 62 degrees at Cordova. Valdez only got up to 55, Middleton Island got to 61, and much of south central Alaska in the upper 50s and low 60s. And as we look towards the central portion of the state, again, all that abundant cloud cover and some of those colder temperatures trying to work down with that system that we saw on the first chart Only 39 degrees here north of the Brooks Range, 54 degrees at Arctic Village and Fort Yukon, 41 degrees at Dead Horse with 40 at Barrow. Nome came in at 49 degrees, and generally it was in the mid to upper 40s, low 50s for much of the interior. As we look towards southwest Alaska, we saw generally in the low to mid 50s for much of the interior locations. Some places like King Salmon reached as high as 59 degrees with a little bit warmer conditions near the coast. Along the Aleutian chain there, we had temperatures anywhere from this 68 is not correct. That is a false value coming off of, I think, that Sand Point there. But we did have mid 50s throughout the Aleutian Range and 49 degrees at St. George with 53 degrees at St. Paul. Out towards the western Aleutians, we kept things in the low to mid 50s. So taking a look at tonight's temperatures, expect cloud cover to keep things fairly moderate. Nothing super cold out there just yet, in the low to mid 50s for southeast Alaska. For much of the for much of the Copper River Basin, expect lower 40s to upper 30s as you get a little bit closer to Eagle. We do expect the colder temperatures to remain north of the Brooks Range, with the mid to upper 30s up there. And over much of western Alaska, expect anywhere from the low to mid 40s, 50 degrees along the coastlines there of western Alaska, and upper 40s, mid 40s for much of the Aleutian Range. As we look into tomorrow's forecast, as we start to see that high pressure building in, warmer temperatures starting to make its way into southwest Alaska in the mid 60s there. Otherwise, cloud cover will keep most of the areas of southeast Alaska confined to the mid to upper 50s. And again, cloud cover for many parts of the eastern portion of the interior, keeping things in the 50s, south of the Brooks Range, upper 30s and low 40s north of the Brooks Range. And then for the northwest interior, that warm onshore flow, keeping things relatively moderate, upper 50s to low 60s. Let's take a look at tomorrow's flying weather. As you can see here, we do have quite a wide swath of MVFR conditions due to those low clouds and lower visibility with the fog out along the west coast. There's where our predominant IFR conditions will be with that fog. We do expect the IFR conditions as well due to ceilings and visibility up along the Arctic coast. Have a small pocket of thunderstorms along the Alaska Range, possibly as far south as the Talkeetna Mountains, but right now thinking mostly along the Alaska Range. And then again, that weakening frontal system that moves through southeast Alaska will keep some isolated pockets of IFR conditions for aviation purposes down in that region as well. Let's take a look at your passes now. In Inuvik Pass is going to be IFR improving to MVFR throughout the day. At again, same conditions. You'll see Lake Clark and Merrill be visual flight rules. And Rainy Pass will improve from MVFR, and as that northwest drying flow develops, becoming VFR. Windy will be MVFR becoming VFR with some thunderstorms possible in the afternoon. Isabel, same conditions there, MVFR to VFR with the potential for convection. Mentasta, marginal visual flight rules to visual flight rules during the afternoon hours with the possibility of convection there as well. Tanita, same story there. And Portage should be VFR throughout the day. We'll also see Chilkoot and White be MVFR, and then as that front moves on shore, expect their conditions to drop to IFR. Now taking a look at our freezing levels as we get here into the middle portion of August, we do start to see that area of colder air trying to work its way down. This should just be a first sign of fall. We don't expect this to make a major surge to the southern portion of the state, but we do have some temperatures near the surface that could go below freezing. Small pocket there along the Alcan border up in the Wrangell-St. Elias range as well. But for the most part, 6,000-foot freezing line through much of the portion of the western half of the state, swinging its way back into south central and otherwise out over the Gulf of Alaska, mainly 10 to 12,000-foot freezing levels there. So with that, icing levels are going to be above 7,000 feet for much of south central Alaska. Small area of light isolated moderate out over the west coast with that weak system above 6,000 feet. Stronger system out over Russia, but off of the mainland of Alaska above 6,000 feet. And then a weak area of light isolated moderate above 4,000 feet for the Arctic coast. As we take a look at our jet stream, we do see a rather active pattern, and this will continue for the week, coming down from the Kamchatka Peninsula 95 and 75 knots, spinning off to the west, and then accelerating all the way up to 120 knots through the northern portion of the Gulf of Alaska, and then jumping into the interior portions of Canada at about 60 knots. This area of low pressure here is not letting go anytime soon. It continues to spin off the coast of California, hopefully bringing those folks much needed rain. And our area of high pressure remains over the northern portion of the Pacific. We do have this weak area of the colder air trying to work its way in, and that's about 60 knots. Not going to be strong enough to displace this area of 120 knots, but they should interact, and that's what's going to help to produce that spin up later tonight with that low south of Dutch Harbor and Kodiak. Now taking a look at tomorrow's 9,000-foot winds, we do see things mainly focusing from west to east with riding up over top of this ridge from northwest down to southeast, and then coming around this area of low pressure at about 35 to 25 knots, wrapping around in a counterclockwise fashion. Over the mainland, we see mainly west to west-east flow, a little bit southwest to northeast at about 15 to 20 knots, and then riding up over this ridge here at about 40 knots and diving down the other side in support of this low at about 15 knots. Looking at 3,000-foot winds, we do see that same pattern riding up over this area of high pressure in the North Pacific, coming down underneath this low at about 40 knots where the gradient squeezes the most, and then driving on into the southeast portion of the state at about 25 knots out of the southwest, becoming northwest as you get towards Canada. Over the mainland, we again see that west-east flow for the most part, except right here in the Bering Strait, southerly flow 20 to 30 knots through that region. And so that keeps our area of light to isolated moderate turbulence below 5,000 feet through that same area, and a few pockets below 3,000, below 5,000 feet, especially with the northwest flow coming through the gaps of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, and then just a small pocket here as the winds interact with terrain for southeast Alaska. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with your marine forecast.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, and in my day job, I manage the Aviation Safety Program with the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health here in Anchorage. This evening, we are honored to have Patrick Thurston back on our show. Mr. Thurston has an interesting career in aviation. He was a pilot in the military and in civilian life, and he's flown all over the world. He's been involved in aviation companies as a pilot and as in management, and we are very happy to welcome him back to the show. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
On our last show, we talked about some of the flying that you did, and we're going to switch a little bit and talk more about some of the safety that you learned and policies and in ideas that you've developed. So you have an analogy about playing sandlot football and flight planning and aviation safety. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I surely can. We certainly did a lot of it in our youth. The original scheme was to get a bunch of guys together and say, you go there and you go there and I'll throw the ball to you and go to the touchdown. And that was as defined as it was. We found out pretty quickly that that wouldn't work the best. So we would get a little piece of paper out, or more commonly, we would draw it in the dirt. Here's the plan, fellas. And we draw where the maneuvers were supposed to take place. And it was clear. And we used a visual pictorial checklist, if you will, about how to conduct ourselves. And that concept precedes that by far, but that was just our experience as youngsters. And that same process existed in life as we go further in our industry and in our professions. So that what we see are actual checklists for airplanes. We have a checklist for many things, and some organizations have a checklist for everything in an airplane. Now, one must guard themselves about getting too much involved in a checklist and forgetting to fly the airplane, of course. So that's fundamental, and it still needs to be watched out for. The safety levels are improved. I think that's distorted somewhat because the volume activity is so much greater now. The miles that are flown, that's distorted a little bit because they're faster, so you can fly more miles in the same length of time. Nonetheless, we're devoting a lot in our industry of attention to some ability to help control our behavior with checklists. Unfortunately, because we're still people and people make mistakes, no matter how well a checklist will get the job done, if you don't do it the way the job specifies, then it doesn't complete its service. So we need to have, and I think we're developing a culture that is moving perhaps a little more slowly than many of us would prefer, towards a controlled behavioral system that allows us to refer to structure, but not give up using our head, and not forget that there is a very scarce element out there called common sense that is supposed to provide us good answers in subjective situations. And I would like to see that we go where we can use some of each, because we need some of each since we're still going to be people operating this equipment.
And do you think this checklist idea is important for general aviation pilots as well as commercial pilots?
It's important for anyone who's going to take an airplane into the sky. It's important for someone who operates a large Caterpillar piece of heavy equipment. I mean, it's a rare situation that some sort of a checklist, like drawings in the dirt for kids playing football in the sandlot, can be helpful for clarifying the situation, for helping construct a system and order and priorities that are more efficient as well as more reliable.
From your background as a pilot and a manager, let's talk about risk assessment, since that's what checklists can help with.
True.
So risk assessment can involve the calculation of potential for loss and probability of loss. And you have a simplified way of viewing risk and planning for contingencies. Can you explain how the questions you ask and how you address when a pilot is taking off for a flight, about how many ways do they want to fail?
Well, that's exactly true. A real fundamental way of determining, perhaps somewhat after or very shortly before the fact, is how concerned are you about what you're doing, Mr. Pilot? Are you comfortable? Are you confident? There's no if in your behavior here. It's a sure thing. And if you find yourself becoming frightened or uneasy, perhaps that's the time to go back and not do what you're in the middle of doing. The simplified way of approaching that is if you don't like it, then why are you doing it?
That's a very good point. Mm-hmm. And we'll leave it on that. We're very privileged to have you here and learn from your experience and knowledge, Mr. Thurston. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed hangar flying, please consider becoming a member of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for our members, donors, and supporters like you. Patrick's stories are a great reminder to have a plan and to follow your plan. We will look forward to having him on our next show and hearing a little bit more about his stories from flying in Indochina and some more safety tips. Until next time, fly safely.
Welcome back to your marine forecast. Let's dive right in here. Taking a look at our sea ice forecast for tonight. As you can see, two things that the sea ice experts pointed out to me. One is this small area of ice pack that is left floating out away from the main pack. Just be aware of that if you're traveling out in those regions, that is out there and could present a hazard. Also, this is a fairly new opening here in the main pack, and it's starting to retreat just a little bit more to the northeast, and so be advised of that as well. Otherwise, the general flow for sea ice is retreating and melting ever so slightly as that warm, moist air keeps pushing up from the southwest to the northeast, and so that will keep conditions at bay a little bit farther to the northeast through the next several days. Now looking at our southeast winds and seas, we can see mainly southeast to southerly flow, 15 to 25 knots for the inner passageways, and seas between 3 and 5 feet. As we get out over the open waters, expect south to southwest winds, 15 to 20 knots, and seas 5 to 6 feet. On into Wednesday now, generally southeast to southerly winds over the inner passageways, 10 knots up towards Lynn Canal with a little bit stronger towards Stevens Passage and Dixon Entrance at 20 to 25 knots. Seas on the order of 2 to 5 feet. And out over the open waters, we start to see things increase a little bit on Wednesday, 25 knots now. Southwest flow for the southern portions with southerly and northwesterly flow, seas between 10 and 11 feet. Now towards south central Alaska, we have easterly flow in Prince William Sound with northerly flow for much of Cook Inlet at about 15 knots. Seas there will be between 3 and 4 feet. Over the open waters, we have quite a variety of winds towards the Barren Islands, eastern Barren Islands, but then expect conditions to become more northwesterly around that area of low pressure, and we'll expect winds between 10 and 20 knots and seas between about 4 and 6 feet. On into Wednesday now, we'll see everything start to shift to the west-northwest, 10 to 25 knots for the most part. Seas a little bit lower in the Cook Inlet region at about 2 feet, and then climbing up to about 7 feet for the western Barrens, 8 feet out over the open Gulf. On into the Alaska Peninsula now, looking for west to northwest winds, 15 to 20 knots, and seas 3 to 4 feet north of the Alaska Peninsula and 5 to 6 feet south of the mainland there. 4-foot seas and westerly flow at 15 knots north of the chain, and 4 to 6 foot, 15 to 20 knots out of the west south of the chain on Wednesday. For the Aleutians now, expect fairly light conditions there with that high pressure building in. A lot of variable conditions for the central Aleutians and westerly flow, 10 to 15 knots, and seas are only going to be between 3 and 5 feet with this pattern. As we get into Wednesday, we start to see a little bit more southeasterly flow with some weak systems over the western Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots and 5-foot seas out there. Otherwise, south to winds to variable winds, seas on the order of 2 to 5 feet and 10 to 15 knots. As we look towards the west coast on Tuesday, expect all westerly flow, seas between 5 and 8 feet, and winds are going to be between 15 and 25 knots. And then on Wednesday, we expect that front to move through, and we have conditions becoming more south to southwesterly, 10 to 15 to 20 knots as you get a little bit farther north, 30 knots up near Gamble, and again, seas will be between about 4 and 7 feet there. And then towards the Arctic coast, north winds for the northeast portion near Dead Horse at about 10 to 15 knots, seas on the order of 4 feet, and then becoming east, southeast, and then eventually south, 15 to 30 knots, and seas between 4 and 6 feet for the northwest portions. And then again on Wednesday, on Wednesday, we expect easterly winds to southeasterly winds, 15 to 30 knots for the northern portions there, and then becoming more westerly and southwesterly with that frontal system bringing that warm air up, seas about 5 feet and winds about 25 knots. So taking a look at, again, the recap for the forecast here, developing area of low pressure is going to start to spin up tonight and start to bring a little bit more moisture to the portions of the northern Gulf and eventually to southeast Alaska. We do have this warm front that will continue to keep warm, moist onshore flow and patchy fog along the west coast with some areas of fog and a possibility of some snow over the Brooks Range. On into Tuesday, we do see another area of thunderstorms develop over the Alaska Range near the Copper River Basin. Our area of low pressure spins up a little tighter and starts to get closer to southeast Alaska, while fog continues with warm, moist flow over northwest. And that's where we have our areas of moderate to possible heavy rain on Wednesday for southeast Alaska, with some more warm air moving into the northwest portions of the state and quiet conditions for the rest of the area. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.